Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara.
I'm Sam.
Late last week, One Nation Senator Pauline Hanson lost a hate speech case brought against her by Green Senator Maher Faruqi. That was over a social media post from 2022. The post was in response to Senator Faruqi's criticism of the monarchy in light of Queen Elizabeth II's death.
Today's ruling tells us that telling someone to go back to where they came from is a strong form of racism.
Let's go all the way back, Zara, to that initial social media post.
Yeah.
What was it about and why did it create this 2.5-year legal dispute?
Yeah, so in a social media post following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, which was, of course, in September of 2022, Maher Faruqi wrote, and I'll just read it out here, "Condolences to those who mourn the Queen. I cannot mourn the leader of a racist empire built on stolen lives, land and wealth of colonised peoples." She called for a treaty with First Nations people, justice and reparations for British colonies. In response, then, Pauline Hanson told Faruqi, among other things, to piss off back to Pakistan. And it's that comment that Maher Faruqi said was hate speech and is the reason that this case existed in the first place.
So Pauline Hanson replies to this comment on social media with what Maher Faruqi has felt is hate speech. What does Maher Faruqi do with that comment?
So shortly after the tweets were posted, Faruqi moved what's called a censure motion in the Senate. And that is just a formal statement of disapproval of a federal politician's actions and policies. Now, you've got to remember both of these key figures in the story both sit together in the Senate and on the crossbench because they both come from minor parties. So they are colleagues. But this obviously happened in the online world, not in physical form.
And when you get censured in the Senate, you don't have to lose your position. It's just a kind of slap on the wrist.
Exactly. And there are no legal consequences. It essentially doesn't hold a lot of weight. But Faruqi urged her fellow senators to condemn Hanson's what she called divisive, anti-migrant and racist statement, which she said unleashed an avalanche of hate. Instead, Labor and coalition senators passed a general motion condemning racism and discrimination in all its forms. It was from there that Faruqi moved to lodge a complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commission, but then Pauline Hanson refused to participate in an investigation there. And so Maher Faruqi at that point turned to legal action and turned to legal avenues where other ones had failed. The grounds for the legal action that Faruqi brought was that she said that Pauline Hanson engaged in unlawful, offensive behaviour that was in breach of the racial discrimination laws that we have in this country. She also provided an expert analysis of social media users' response to Hanson's post. And
That's
that
really
was
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that was at the heart of it. It wasn't just the statement itself, but the fallout and what it incited that was really interrogated and investigated as part of the case.
And so that was the case that was heard earlier this year.
Yep.
Maher Faruqi and her legal representatives got up and said this was in breach of the racial discrimination legal framework. What did Hanson kind of lean into in the case?
So Pauline Hanson argued she was making fair comment on a matter of public interest. So there she's talking about the monarchy, a First Nations treaty and Australian Republican attitudes. So that is to leave the monarchy. She also tried to argue that her post was protected by an implied but not an expressly stated constitutional right of political communication. It's a bit jargony, but essentially she was relying there on this idea of free speech. And lastly, Hanson's lawyers also argued that she wasn't aware that Maher Faruqi was Muslim when she made the comments that she made.
And so part of that last argument is Hanson trying to tell the court that there was an intent behind that. And a big part of the Racial Discrimination Act is you intend to cause harm.
Exactly.
So that was what Hanson argued. And the reason you and I are talking about it today is because the judge handed a decision down on Friday.
Yeah.
What did they find?
So Justice Angus Stewart rejected all of Pauline Hanson's arguments and concluded that her post was racist, anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim, and ultimately ruled that she had racially vilified Maher Faruqi. He noted Hanson's tendency to make, quote, racist and Islamophobic comments in the past. He said that the post was reasonably likely, and that's the threshold that we're talking about, to have been profoundly and seriously offensive, insulting, humiliating and intimidating to the reasonable targeted person in the position of Senator Faruqi, as well as to the people of colour who are migrants to Australia or are Australians of relatively recent migrant heritage and Muslims who are people of colour in Australia. So very broad there.
Big net.
Exactly. And the judge there is showing the flow-on effects of what he deemed hate speech. He also said that Hanson's position as a senator was relevant, so the power that she has as a senator was relevant because it encouraged others online with less power and status to publish the same sort of messages or worse.
What an interesting reasoning from the judge there that, you know, this is not just somebody else tweeting. This is somebody in a position of power.
Well, it goes to what we were talking about before of Maureen Faruqi bringing up social media specialists who could look at what one person's tweet had unleashed online and the power that one person and the influence that one person who is a senator in Australian Parliament, what that leads to.
It's an interesting one as well with senators because there's parliamentary privilege. So they can kind of say what they want inside the chamber.
But that absolutely doesn't stand online.
Really interesting. So the judge found in Maureen Faruqi's favour.
Yeah.
What was her reaction after the decision was handed down?
Well, outside court, Maureen Faruqi said that the ruling was historic and groundbreaking. She said, "Today's judgment is a win for every person who has been told to go back to where they came from." Here's a bit more about what she said.
And it is also an affirmation for migrants that people of color do not have to be grateful or to keep quiet. And I will be speaking out more loudly and more strongly than ever before.
Faruqi, also here talking directly about Pauline Hanson, said it's time the senator faced consequences for the racism she's been piling on Muslims, people of colour and First Nations people for more than 30 years.
It's really important to mention that this is not now moving on to a sentencing where Pauline Hanson goes to jail for any of this.
No.
What does happen next?
So the court's ordered, as I said at the top, Hanson to pay Faruqi's legal fees and to remove the original post. So she has 7 days, I understand, to delete that original post. Faruqi had initially requested Hanson pay a sum of money to charity, but the judge didn't include that in his final order. Hanson has confirmed that she will appeal the decision, and she said that the decision was deeply disappointing. She claims that Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which is what this whole case hinges on, is that impinges on freedom of political expression. So we can get a sense of what any appeal lodged by Pauline Hanson will look like in future.
And because of how complex and politically loaded this conversation would be, these appeals could take a long time and keep climbing up the chain all the way to the High Court. Zara, thank you so much for that brief on this case. And thank you for joining us on the Daily Aus this morning. A big week of news ahead for all of us. The US election is taking place on Wednesday, Australia time, and TDA will be here to take you through what you need to know on the major decisions being made by the US public. If you want to keep track of everything, make sure you're following us on Instagram and signed up to our newsletter as well. We'll speak to you again tomorrow morning. Until then, have a good day.